You very much, Tim. Of course, I'm John Korstein, Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum and Park. And today we're going to talk about one of the great naval heroes of the Civil War, as well as the second ship he would command during the war. And so this program is John Worden and the USS Montauk. Now, the Montauk is what is called a Passaic-class monitor. And what Erickson did, based on comments from Worden, comments from William Jeffers, who was the fourth commander of the Monitor, excuse me. And so basically, they did some changes. They made the ship longer to 200 feet. They also put the pilot house on top of the turret. If you remember the Battle of the Ironclads, Battle of Hampton Roads, that they had trouble communicating between the two. This way, there was no trouble in communications. You could shout right down into the turret where to fire. And it was a cylindrical pilot house protected by 8 inches of iron. They have more iron on the turret itself, 10 inches. They also have added the most powerful gun the U.S. Navy basically used, or shell gun, I should say, and that would be the 15-inch gun. They wanted to have both 15-inch, both in the ship. However, they couldn't produce enough of the 15-inch Dahlgren shell guns to be able to put them in all these Passaic. Actually, Worden will later advise, get rid of the 11-inch, put in a 100-pounder or 150-pounder Parrott rifle so that you would have different types of shot available. We know the 15-inch gun is going to be an ironclad killer. We'll talk about that sometime later in the year, but it is a very powerful gun. Now, Worden, if you remember, was blinded during the battle between the Monitor and the CSS Virginia on March 9th, 1862. It took him a while to recover his eyesight. He doesn't go back on active duty until October. In the meantime, everyone, like he's getting the thanks of Congress, all these things, because they recognize his unique leadership skills. Now, he loses sight in his left eye, and I'd always wondered what color eyes he had, and I learned from the paymaster, Samuel T. Brown, of the Montauk, that he actually had gray eyes. So anyway, this new class of Monitor, they will build 10 of them. They're in a big rush because Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy, actually wants to take this new class of Monitor and take them down to Beaufort, North Carolina. And he first wants to have a combined operation with Major General John Gray Foster, who's at New Bern. And so he wants to come down to New Bern to besiege Wilmington, as these new monitors will come into the Cape Fear River and shell Fort Fisher and Fort Caswell from the rear, defeating them and then capturing Wilmington. It was a great plan, but the problem was that the draft of the Passaic-class monitors is 11.6 feet. Sadly, the old inlet going into the Cape Fear River, there's 2 inlets, as we know, old and new inlet. The old inlet at high tide is 11 feet, so those boats couldn't get in to the Cape Fear River. And so when they all figure out that, oh my gosh, Foster doesn't really want to cooperate, that the monitors can't get into the Cape Fear River, so they will change their mind, because really the hated target for Gideon Welles and so many other members of the Union leadership was Charleston, that snake pit of secession, as some people would say. So the idea is that we're going to bring all our ironclads down to Port Royal Sound and then make a move on Charleston. However, it takes time for these ships to move, get ready to leave. Now, basically, the Montauk will be commissioned at the Brooklyn Navy Yard on December 14th. And basically, Worden was detailed by Rear Admiral Samuel Lee, who's commander of the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron, to come down to Hampton Roads. This makes a lot of people really happy because the crew of the Monitor are there in Hampton Roads, and they can't wait to see their old commander. So consequently, what we're going to see is that the Montauk, under tow by the there's our hero Worden. And I want to tell you, he gets promoted on July 11th to commander. So he's Commander John Worden at this time. And so just like any other Monitor, they have to come down from New York to Hampton Roads. They run into very heavy weather. It's great that the Monitor had William Keeler writing all about the Monitor. He was the paymaster. Well, the paymaster of the Montauk will do the same thing. He says that the ironclad went through short, choppy waves as we steamed into them and would overflow over the deck. And the heavy waves forced everything into whatever crevice it could come in. Just like before, Worden has to bring out the Andrews centrifugal pump, and basically they have to put into the Delaware Bay, and they will wait there until the storm passes. Storm takes several days, so once it clears, they then will come down to Hampton Roads. Paymaster talks about the storm. The sea swept across our deck like a deluge. It seemed we were having the latter and lesser half of the storm. So it's a terrible storm. Let's just put it that way. So they come into Hampton Roads, and it was beautiful weather. And Brown will say that when they came in, and there were several ironclads there, the Passaic, the Galena, the new Ironsides, and also the Monitor. And Brown says, the Monitor, to which our gray-eyed commander called attention as we came in and told us of his famous fight. The Monitor's crew were dying to see him. However, that very same afternoon, January 29, they will have to leave to go to Beaufort, North Carolina. And of course, as we know, the Monitor will sink en route. So basically, the Montauk will also, on January 1st, 1863, the Monitor has already sank the day before. They will go down Hatteras, and they catch the tail end of the storm. They're going to be towed by the USS James Alger, another powerful paddle wheel. So Brown once again says, catching the tail end of the storm, they hit it when they're right off Hatteras Light. And Brown will say, the sea swept across our decks like a deluge. It seemed we were having the latter and lesser half of the storm. Signals were exchanged from our turret and the paddle boxes of the James Alger. The ghastly light thrown by the signals out of the darkness upon the seething crest of the waves, the roaring of the sea as it dashed against the ship and the turret and submerged the hull, a cold spray thrust by the wind against our faces, and we on this little tower, not even the ship's deck, 9 feet below us, in sight more than half the time, made it an experience never to be desired again. However, one of the things that Brown's going to comment, just like everyone on the Monitor, the Passaic, although they widen the hull reaching out to the armored deck, there is still an overhang. And Brown says that sometimes the big seas would hit under the overhang with a shock that made the vessel tremble from stem to stern. Oh my gosh. So the same problem is going to be, but the Monitor or the Montauk is going to make it all fine. And as they come into Beaufort, they're going to run aground. Worden's really kind of upset about that. However, he surveys the vessel. No damage was done. So then from Beaufort, they're ordered to Port Royal Sound, where actually several other ships are already assembling for the planned attack against Charleston. And Worden's going to meet with Rear Admiral Samuel Francis Du Pont. And so Du Pont, he knows Worden knows ironclads better than anybody else. So he's going to select Worden to take his ironclad and to go and attack a Confederate fort defending Savannah known as Fort McAllister. So there were 10 days to pass before he could leave Port Royal Sound, and that is going to mean that they will reach Ossabaw Sound, Georgia on January 24th, and he is in command of a flotilla, including the Wissahickon and the Seneca, which are Undella-class gunboats that basically have one 11-inch Dahlgren and one 20-pounder rifle. The other two ships under his command are going to be the USS Dawn, which has two 32-pounders and one 20-pounder. And it is charged with towing the mortar schooner, the C.P. Williams, which had a 13-inch Seacoast mortar on the deck of the ship and also had two 32-pounder guns. Now, these wooden ships had already tried to go past Fort McAllister, but they could not. Now, I've got to tell you, Fort McAllister is an earthen fort, and it is going to be a fort that was built out of marsh mud and, believe it or not, sand. So this is going to offer a problem for the Union in bombarding it. It will have 11 heavy Seacoast guns, including a 10-inch Seacoast mortar, a 8-inch shell gun, a 10-inch banded Columbia, a 42-pounder, and three 32-pounders banded, as well as 12 Napoleons to guard the land face. So this is really, Brown's going to describe massive proportions of the fortification, its banks covered with rich green sod, and the muzzles of the guns just visible, pointing at us from heavily protected embrasures between the guns, traverses extended back to the rear, effectively covering the guns from unfailing fire. Wow. So this is a large fort. And as a result of that, Worden, now let's just say the fort is on Genesis Point on the big Ogeechee River, and it is below the Savannah and Florida Railroad. Okay, so that's a big connection going south to Florida, where the Confederates get cattle and salt and stuff like that. And also up right at the bridge is a nemesis of the U.S. Navy, the CSS Nashville. However, now it's known as the Rattlesnake. You see the ship of the Nashville, after making its run to Great Britain and back, sinking two merchant ships, it will be sold to Fraser Trenholm and Company, and they will operate it as a blockade runner, and then when they run the blockade into Savannah, they will actually run aground. Will be trapped up the big Ogeechee by the U.S. Navy, right? That closes Ossabaw Sound. So Fort McAllister is guarding two important resources for the Confederates: a railroad bridge, the Nashville, and also if the Federals can get up past that railroad bridge, they then are going to be able to attack Savannah from the west. And so that's very, very critical. So Worden has a big job. Actually, DuPont's going to tell him that you've got three things you need to do, or actually more than three, but the goals were supposed to be, number one, you're going to have to destroy Fort McAllister. Number two, you're going to have to burn the railroad bridge over the big Ogeechee. And number three, if you can, destroy the Nashville. See, the Federals don't know these name changes. So it went from the Nashville to becoming a blockade runner, and eventually it's going to be named the Rattlesnake, and its privateer. It actually has a 100-pounder pivot gun at its bow. So it's a powerful ship, fast, and everyone's worried about it. So basically, on the 27th of January, 1863, Worden's squadron gets underway and took up positions. You see, they went up the river at night, and the commander of the Seneca will pull up the Confederate stakes that were range markers. They'll investigate. See, they put in pilings so that you couldn't approach the fort closely. And if you were going to try and run past the fort, you'd have to stop and remove those pilings. And that would put you under very heavy fire from the fort itself. So Worden, when he comes up to his anchorage selected by Lieutenant Commander John Davis of the Seneca, they will actually be 1,500 yards away from Fort McAllister. Consequently, they start firing shells into Fort McAllister. It doesn't look like they're having any impact whatsoever. They will fight the fort for almost 5 hours. Worden expends all of his shells because he realized his cord solid shot has no effect. It just burrows into the marsh mud. So they have to use all their shells, and they run out of shells. So he surveys the ship after they go downriver on the 27th, and they don't think they do any damage to Fort McAllister. Worden will say that the ship was hit 4 times on the turret, 3 times on the side armor, 4 times on the deck armor, once on the smokestack, and the Confederates blew up one of the cutters, and the spar that was the cutters could lash to at the stern of the Monitor. The Confederates report very little damage, no casualties whatsoever. Now, Worden will go back down to the Ossabaw Sound, the Florida Passage, where they're anchored, and he will come across a contraband who is a pilot, and he tells Worden that, oh my gosh, I can actually get you right near where the pilings are ending. I know where the torpedoes have been seated. And so this is the interior of the Passaic. This is the Connecticut, which took the ship down. Here we have Samuel Francis Du Pont, and not in his uniform. This is, of course, Port Royal Sound with the Union fleet. It's a great anchorage. Here we go. Look at this map. You can see Port Royal Sound is up to the north, but you go past the Savannah River. The entrance is Fort Pulaski. You then can go past Tybee Island, and then you get to go into Wassaw Sound, and then come down into Ossabaw Sound. And then you see the big Ogeechee River, and here is the railroad bridge. There is Fort McAllister. So if you notice, it's at this big reach called Harvey's Cut, and so they can only get so close to the fort. So with this contraband, he is able to bring the turret, or the Montauk, on January 31st, 1863. And sadly, we don't know this man's name. He's former enslaved individual. So basically, it's a heavy fog. Worden somehow gets within 600 yards below the Confederate battery on the other side of the river. He gets close to the bank as he can, and he begins firing his shells. The mist is so thick, the fog, that they really can't see what they're shooting at. Nevertheless, the Montauk will be hit first at 7:43 by Fort McAllister. It slams into the turret. Now, 1 hour later, in this exposed position, Worden all of a sudden notices the tide is going out. Well, he found out there was 14 feet of water beneath his ironclad. However, the tide's going out and the tide was dropping 5 feet. The Passaic-class has 11.6-foot draft. So Worden has to go back down river to a position 1,500 yards away from the fort and then continue the bombardment. Worden felt his cannonade was only tearing up earthworks and not having any impact or damage to the Confederate artillery. Since he did not think he could inflict any damage, Worden will break off action 11:53 in the morning. He's very precise in his log about when he starts and does this and that. Now, Fort McAllister actually had suffered a great deal. Those big 15-inch shells are very deadly. The commander of the fort, R.H. Anderson, will say that the enemy fired steadily and with remarkable precision. At times, their fire was terrible. Anderson noted that it seemed that the Montauk was focusing on the 8-inch Columbiad, destroying the entire parapet in front of it, but not damaging the gun. One of the 32-pounder guns would be hit by a shell from the Montauk that blows off its trunnion, wrecks its carriage, and the shell blew the brains out of Major John Galley, who was the commander of the gun. The Confederates have only suffered one casualty in 2 bombardments. Now, meanwhile, the Montauk is going to be struck 48 times. And this is pretty serious stuff because 16 times on the turret, 3 times on the pilot house, 7 times on the smokestack, 7 times on the side armor, and had 2 flagstaffs shot away. Paymaster Brown once again says scores of indentations on our turret and pilot house, broken off some of the bolts and driven them inside. 2 of them had passed within 3 inches of my head. So the Montauk's chief engineer, second assistant engineer, Thomas A. Stevens, will write a report about the purpose of these attacks, beside trying to destroy this fort, is really, and here you can see the traverses. This is a great view of one of the Columbiad gun positions. There they are putting or removing one after the war's over, the 8-inch Columbiad. So you can just see it's a powerful fort. So there's the Montauk near the pilings. This is the attack on the 31st of January. And so you can see they can only get so close. These are the other vessels, the Wisconsin, the Seneca, the Dawn, and the C.P. Williams. So they're bombarding this earthwork. Now, basically, Worden will ask for a report from the engineer. He reports that, oh my gosh, the temperatures in the engine room never exceeded 104 degrees. Remember, this is the end of January, so it's winter time, and yet the engine room is just like on all monitors, overheats, and it's hard to believe how you could work in such conditions. Now, the engineer then studied the damage, and he became very critical of the ship's operations and construction. And his findings were very damning about Continental Iron Works and how they put together the Montauk and the workmanship qualities. Stevens wrote, having examined the broken bolts and injured plates of iron, that the broken bolts were cold short. They had been improperly fitted, either for strength or safety. He believed that the bolts fit loosely, depending on the heads and nuts, which are screwed up rigidly inside. The deck iron plates are fractured in several places as well, as though on the outside armor. Now, Worden moves this report towards Du Pont, because the real thing See, Du Pont's been told by Gideon Wells, you're going to have to attack Charleston. And that means you got to go past all these forts, Battery Wagner, Battery Gregg, Fort Moultrie, uh, Fort Sumter. That's the outer defenses. And so the Confederates be going into a cul-de-sac. So how well do these ships stand up to bombardments? And so Worden is doing these reports to say, look, this ship, it can take anything when it's hit. However, it has slow rate of fire and limited firepower. So fighting against a fort with these conventional shell guns, they just, earthwork just swallows up these shots, unlike a brick fort. Now, Worden becomes, now on the 31st, Worden is going, January, he's going to receive even greater accolades. In fact, the House of Representatives has passed this joint resolution tendering the thanks of Congress to Commander John L. Worden for good conduct in the conflict between the Monitor and the Merrimack. 2 days later, on February 3rd, Worden received the thanks of Congress for highly distinguished conduct in the conflict between the USS Monitor and CSS Virginia, and the president is authorized to advance him 1 grade in rank. Worden was promoted to captain the same day. While all this is going on, while he's on the Montauk, they actually have Louis Comfort Tiffany make a gold presentation sword that they give to Worden. And so Worden is the top dog of ironclad commanders. Now, sadly, Worden becomes ill. He will go on the receiving ship at Port Royal Sound, the Vermont. And once he recovers, he goes back to the Montauk in Ossabaw Sound, and there they will plan an attack on February 27, 1863. Now, what's going to happen is that the Nashville wants to get to sea. And when they think they have defeated the Union squadron at the end of January, now they think they have a chance to slip the Rattlesnake out of the Ossabaw River, because they want to get out to sea and be a commerce raider like several other ships. And the Federals know that they fear the Nashville more than anything else. And so it's a big symbol. And so it comes down river, and so this is the crew members of the Wissahickon. And this is taken right around the time of the action. This is the deck of the Vermont. The Vermont was a 73-gun ship of the line, which was outmoded, but it was towed down to Port Royal Sound so that it could be used as a hospital and a receiving ship to train crew members to serve on more active ships. So basically, now remember, we go from the Nashville to the Thomas L. Ragg. That's what's a blockade runner. And then it'll be bought from Fraser, Treadham and Company by a private group who will turn it into a privateer known as the Rattlesnake. The Confederates know it to be the Rattlesnake. The Federals still call it the Nashville. So basically, the Nashville will decide to come down river. And Wells is worried about this ship. Actually, he calls it proverbially fast and doubtless rival the Alabama or the Oriento, which is the Florida, in their depreciation of our commerce. I've never lost sight of the great importance of keeping her or destroying her if I could. Now that falls on the shoulder of Worden, and as a result of that, Worden Paymaster Brown will say, a little more than 2 weeks before she, the Nashville, came down from her retreat near the bridge of the Savannah and Florida Railroad and took position under the guns of Fort McAllister, intending to take advantage of the spring tides prevailing then and seize the first opportunity to slip to sea. We had been waiting for this moment. She reminded me of a caged rat seeking a hole for escape and finding none. Well, on actually the 27th, the federal squadron will come up the big Ogeechee, and they'll notice the Nashville. And they notice that, it is stuck, because they can see from the pilot house over the marshy point known as Genesis Point, and they can see the Nashville right there. In fact, Worden can take a position where he can shoot into the fort, but instead he has a closer range the Nashville. Now, Worden thought, by moving up close to the obstructions in the river, I was able, although under heavy fire from the battery, to approach the Nashville still aground within a distance of 1,200 yards. Bradley Osborne of the New York Herald will say, there she lay, hard and fast aground. The hasty unloading and sturdy labors of the little tug, which has been going on through the night, having failed to relieve her, she was a fair mark and knew that she was doomed. Well, Brown notices from the pilot house, they're all looking at this nemesis, right? And that we can see the whole steamer. She is newly painted in the same light drab colors as our own vessel of war. Her masts and spars look well, her rigging taut, and her figurehead recently gilded. At 7:07, Worden will open fire on the privateer with both his 15-inch and 11-inch gun. They are really trying to establish the range because he's going to have his fuses adjusted. So the fifth shot taken at the Nashville by the 15-inch Dahlgren, according to Paymaster Brown. Now, Paymaster Brown, during the engagement, all the engagements, his job was to record when the Montauk was hit, when the Montauk fired and what it fired at, and what was the disposition of the shot. So basically, Worden on the fifth shot from the 15-inch Dahlgren, Brown, after the smoke clears, can see the projectile flying through the air towards the Nashville. He followed it distinctly with our eyes, and it penetrated the rebels' deck near the foremast. He further noted that the shot has done its work, and we see a column of whitish gray smoke from her forehatch, and in 5 minutes, more tongues of flames leaped up through the smoke high into the air. Worden's going to send a total of 14 shots into the Nashville. As Brown is going to write, another shell smashes through the paddle box and explodes at the base of the smokestack, which comes tumbling down. The last shot was fired at 8:03, and as the smoke clears away from our last shot, we can see the flames bursting out around her paddle boxes, issuing in great sheets from the forehatch, creeping up the foremast. Worden takes the Montauk away from action and watch the Nashville burn. At 9:20, the large pivot gun explodes due to the heat, and then at 9:55, the flames will reach the magazine of the Rattlesnake Nashville, and she will blow up in a tremendous firework expression. And then that Confederate ship, Worden knew, was left a smoking ruin. Now, the trouble is as now that they've done their job, they're not so worried about the fort. They destroyed the Nashville. Everyone's happy. The crews, of course, are going to get prize money for doing that. So they head back down river. Now, basically, at 9:35, while the Nashville is burning, the Montauk strikes a torpedo. And when the explosion was heard, he thought that it was, he noted that it was a violent and sudden and seemingly double explosion. He thought that actually a shell had entered the engine room and feared that the boilers might explode. The Montauk begins to take on water, and which was handled at first by the bilge pumps. Then, as the water rose 6 inches in the engine room, they'll bring out the centrifugal Andrews pump, and then with the bilge injector, and then actually Worden will organize a bucket brigade to pull the water out and gets the hand pumps operating. This is, in other words, we're sinking condition, right? No one can actually find where the leak had been caused by the explosion of the torpedo. Actually, it hits a pipe and blows off its valve, and cracks a fissure in the hull of the Montauk that is about a 1/4 inch wide, but that's enough for water to come in. So the Montauk is in big trouble, but Worden quickly decides we're going to run our ship aground because the tide's going out, and we're going to run it aground on the mud bank so that that will help patch our vessel or give us an opportunity to temporarily repair it. Well, the pilot, an Irishman known as Murphy, he's been on as pilot along with the contraband for over a month. He will steer or guide the vessel onto the mud bank, and this is the evil Nashville. As you can see, I keep forget to do my slides. So that's sinking the Harvey Birch. There is the Montauk, and there is the Nashville. You can see her opportunity. There's the fort, there's the Nashville. So here's another view of the Nashville. This is 1,200 yards away. You can see the Confederates, as Brown would say, escaping the ship like rats. So these actually Confederates, they think, actually put the torpedo in the water after the Montauk and the Wissahickon and the Seneca and the Dawn had all come past the river. The Confederates then drop a torpedo. Here you can see the pipe hole right there. The fissure is right below there. This is actually on a mud bank. Now, Worden knows that, oh my gosh, the tide's going to come back in. So they quickly, now Murphy put the ship on an even keel as he ran it aground. Really amazing act of seamanship. And so the Confederates led the Union, the crew of the Montauk, led by Stevens, will patch the vessel. And that the hull, even though it was fractured, they'll put in pine knots and everything, oakum and red putty to fill that fissure, and then they block the pipe so that there can be no other leaks, and they can't do anything else. They only have 5 hours to make these repairs before high tide will float the Montauk. And of course, they fix it in time, and the Montauk's able to go back down to Ossabaw Sound and thence to Port Royal Sound. Now, as the Montauk is going down river, coming into the river was another Monitor known as the Nahant. And the Nahant was commanded by Worden's good friend, Commander John Downs. And as the ships pass, this is a very narrow river. So as the ships pass, according to ship's boy Alva Hunter, Worden exhibited a boy-like enthusiasm, was very manifest as he came across the narrow space between the two vessels. Worden fairly danced up and down with enthusiasm as he told of the jolly good time he had enjoyed. He had destroyed the Nashville. Now, he doesn't mention I almost sank because I hit a torpedo. No, I care that I have what? Destroyed what he made the final disposition of a vessel which had long been in the minds of the public as a troublesome pest. Now, when the Montauk gets to Port Royal Sound, Worden writes several reports about the conditions, firepower and so forth of the ship, the communication systems and so forth. But he also gets his senior engineer Stevens to write a report, and this is a scathing report. He writes, "I feel bound to complain in the name of of and for all engaged in the engine room department of these vessels, the indifference, the negligence manifested in the construction of the machinery and the hull by builders to the lives and well-being of those necessarily engaged below hatches in the engine room. He believed that the torpedo damage reinforced his belief that really mechanical flaws caused by poor design, materials, and workmanship caused more damage than the torpedo. He said that pipe that was breached, that he could actually take a hammer and knock it off, just a small, regular claw hammer. So, in other words, the engineer thought that the shoddy workmanship really caused the damage. Remember, the bolts weren't properly protected, so they fly inside the turret and the pilot house. There is no escape for anyone in the engine room. In other words, if a boiler bursts, you're going to be there and you're going to be scalded and killed as a result of that, because there's no quick way out of the engine room. And he considers that to be a serious flaw that could cause a great loss of life. And he blames the shoddy workmanship in northern shipyards due to unreasoning avarice, if that be an excuse. Worden agreed, and he forwarded the report to Admiral Du Pont, noted, "This is, in my opinion, so serious a flaw that I beg leave to urge that a remedy may be applied if possible." John Worden, though, by the time he returns to Port Royal Sound, greater accolades are going to be laid upon his feet. He had destroyed the Nashville, and which made major news in the northern papers. Remember, this is the news will get out on the 1st of March, 1863. The Union's not doing but so well in the war at this time. So a victory like the destruction of the Nashville brings joy to the entire public. When he returns to Port Royal Sound, of course, he has all these reports to give to Du Pont. He says the rate of fire was too slow. The shells could not damage earthen forts. He recommended that the turrets be fitted with rifle guns to use against stone or brick fortifications. While they had adequate armor to protect themselves, he noted that these warships had several weak points, such as the pilot house, which is exposed sitting up there. Actually, one officer, Christopher Rogers, will be in a pilot house and a shell will hit it, killing everyone inside. So it's really an exposed mark. He also said that there was no protective link between the turret and the deck. Even though the turret sat in a brass ring, a shot could wedge the turret and stop it from turning. As a result of that, he believed there should be a iron shield put along there to stop any jamming of the turrets, and especially, they could be jammed by a solid shot. And then he talks about torpedoes. Now, he made no big deal about the torpedo damaging the Montauk and how great it was that Worden saved his ship. The same day he sinks another ship. But he does advise Du Pont that that is the greatest danger to the Monitor, the Passaic-class, and all the following classes of ironclads or monitors, that the hull is 1 inch boilerplate, right? And you can see how the overhang is. So it's vulnerable for the explosion of a large torpedo could sink the ship. And we know that happens to ships like the Patapsco, will actually strike a torpedo and sink. The Tecumseh is probably the most famous scene during the Battle of Mobile Bay. So Worden is considered the man who knows everything about monitors. He's going to suggest that that hull actually reach out to the overhang and actually be made of thicker iron to protect them from torpedoes. None of that's going to happen. However, Worden will continue serving in the South Atlantic blockading squadron blockade, the South Atlantic blockading squadron, all the way through the Battle of Charleston, which we'll talk about at a different time. We then will also discuss the the attack on Charleston, which Worden will participate in. After that attack, he is going to be sent to the Washington Navy Yard to survey plans and make improvements to future monitors that are being built. So that's how he ends the war as a scientific officer, as was his trait, in trying to perfect an imperfect ship. Okay, so anyway, that's the story of John Worden, who's now a captain, who's now a great hero. Well, he was already a great hero because of the Monitor, but now fresher laurels have been showered upon him, and he is considered the greatest ironclad captain of the Civil War by this time. So that's my story. If you have any questions, I know Miss Murphy will control them and I guess ask me. There he is. Now I got to tell you, see that broken shell? Brown says that while the Montauk is shelling now they're not paying attention to Fort McAllister, they're shelling the Nashville. One shot that he believed to be from an 8-inch Columbiad struck the pilot house and split in two. And it looks like Worden is pointing at it saying, look, we're impervious to shot. I don't know for sure, but I think that's Fort McAllister in the background. But, many commanders had similar lithographs made about them, Farragut, Porter, Foote, and so forth, all have similar images on a deck of a ironclad, including Du Pont. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Questions, please.
John, advance one more slide so we can have our
yes,
contact information. But
yes,
first we'll talk about questions. I'm Julie Murphy, and I have the pleasure of managing these lecture series and of trying to manage Mr. Korstein, which is easier said than done. not really. My pleasure. We do have three questions, and I have one. Michael Werner, welcome back, Michael. Could the Confederate ironclads and Savannah work their way to Fort McAllister through inland waterways and canals?
Well, they could do that. What they have to do is come down the Savannah River or the St. Mary's River to Wassaw Sound, and then they could have moved to Ossabaw Sound. So they could have done that. And actually, I'm going to be doing a program sometime, I think in June, where I talk about the CSS Atlanta, and it will try to come down and actually not go into Ossabaw Sound, but to go up into Port Royal Sound, because they thought all the Union monitors were up in outside of Charleston. Well, big surprise. The Atlanta is going to encounter the Weehawken and the Nahant, and after 5 shots, she will surrender. So I'll tell all about that. The Atlanta had the best engines of any Confederate ironclad. I can tell you that because they were Scottish built.
Another attendee is asking, and I think I asked you this myself, John, Navy skippers don't usually leave their command under wartime, even when ill. What illness incapacitated Worden?
Worden actually, I think, goes on sick leave at least 10 times. It's not recorded what his ailment is this time. However, he suffers from gallstones or kidney stones. We're not sure. No one really knows. It's just that when you pass them, you kind of are debilitated. I've had them. I don't wish them on anybody. So it's more likely that it's his gallstones that are bothering him, and which they will take you off a ship and put you in, because they want better medical services for a hero like Worden. So it's unusual, but Worden's a hero, so he gets to do that.
Mhm. Lauren asked, what did Worden do after the war?
Oh my gosh. Worden is a hero for all times, I got to tell you. He tests a couple of ships, the Pensacola and the Idaho, which had faulty engineering systems. He tests them and advises the Navy to say, well, look, take the engines out. This thing will never work. He then will become commander of the European squadron. And after that, he becomes the commandant of the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. He's promoted to Rear Admiral, and he will be continues in the Navy, and he goes on to retiring boards and things like that. He, after he retires or in semi-retirement, he will be the founder of the Metropolitan Club in Washington, D.C. Actually, I've been there several times. I think you've been there, Julie. And there's this huge painting of Worden that is life-size, if not even bigger than life, because Worden was only 5'6". And there he is with his Tiffany sword. And like, if you're going upstairs to the dining rooms, you have to look upon the picture of John Lorimer Worden, a hero for all times. He also is the founder of the U.S. Naval Institute, which still exists today, putting out two major magazines about the modern Navy and historical Navy. And then it also is a great publishing house for books about anything naval. I don't think they'll, and even if it's nonfiction naval history, we were going to be doing a program in March with, I'm going to be with Robert McComber, who's a noted historical fiction writer. And so we're going to talk about the art of writing and understanding unusual parts of the Civil War. So that's sometime in March. So it is really, he does, everywhere he goes with a certain humbleness, and yet is showered with fame, and yet he carries it all within his stride in an outstanding fashion that is a model for us all to follow.
The program, John, that you'll do with Robert Macomber is March 11, and we have lots of Floridians with us today. So you may want to join us for that. It's at 7 p.m. on March 11, and that will be John and Robert discussing Florida and the Caribbean in the Civil War, which is not as well known to us up here in the Old Dominion, and certainly Peninsula Campaign followers and whatnot. So mark your calendar for that one. We have, excuse me, another question from Alexander. How similar is the Montauk to the Monitor? Was Montauk's design modified at all as a result of combat, aside from repairs?
Lessons learned, as we're going to say. The pilot house is going to be moved on top of the turret. They're going to be more iron on the turret itself. They upgrade the armament to a 15-inch Dahlgren, which is actually what Erickson wanted to put on the Monitor, but they just couldn't make that overnight. So they have to put 11-inch Dahlgrens taken from the Dakota on the Monitor. The Passaic-class is 201 feet in length, so it's longer, has greater beam, a greater draft, 11.6 feet draft versus 10.6 on the Monitor. The Montauk would use the side lever trunk engine, just like the Monitor did. No improvements. They do improve the blower system so that the blowers work to bring the air, suck it down through the grating on top of the turret and suck it down and blow it through the ship. So it's a more effective airflow But still, as Stevens noted, in February, the engine room was 104 degrees. So without air conditioning, I don't think I would serve in the engine room, especially as a coal heaver. But yes, there are some great differences. Erickson keeps fiddling with this ship, although the whole concept of monitors are not an ocean-going ship. They make some with twin turrets, like the mini Montauk, and that is able to go to sea. However, they have to build a breakwater at the bow, and they're really not a good ocean-going vessel, as Samuel Dana Green said before the Monitor sank. So I think what you have is step-by-step improvement as they develop greater classes. But to look at it from afar, you could tell the difference because of that pilot house sticking up on top of the turret. See, you can see in this picture how the pilot house is right on top. Plus, they have permanent smokestack, unlike the ones that could close. The blowers on the Monitor, which would have been behind the smokestack, which sometimes would suck in smoke, so it didn't work well, are removed so that the air is coming down from the grated roof of the turret. So if you have other questions, I wrote a 6,000 word blog. I got carried away this week. And Julie keeps telling me, stop writing that stuff. And it's such a great story that I just couldn't help myself.
They can review the pictures that, they can see the pictures in there too.
In the pictures of the blog? Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, that's great. So yeah, it's a pretty fabulous a story about the Montauk. Just wait till I tell the story of the attack of Charleston, Du Pont's attack on Charleston, which is another thriller, in my opinion, that does not bring great success to Du Pont. Actually, it cost his job. So anyway, are there other questions?
I'm just going to announce two upcoming. Next Friday, John will revisit ironclads with the CSS Chicora and the CSS Palmetto State. And we'll get a good dose of blockade breaking, hopefully, right, John?
Yes, well, it's at the same time that the Montauk's fighting against Fort McAllister, the Confederates, for the first time, will send their ironclads out beyond the bar at Charleston Harbor and out into the sea to, and if you want to talk about unseaworthy vessels, that's a Confederate ironclad. So it's a great story. I don't want to ruin it now, but it involves PGT, Beauregard, and some other very noted figures from the war in the Confederate Navy. It is a Union defeat. Let's put it that way. So here's down in Georgia, the U.S. Navy's doing well. Up in Charleston, they're embarrassed. So anyway,
well, in January, we'll close John's series with on the 22nd at noon with a fascinating look at the Hampton Roads port of embarkation in World War I. So he has to leave his favorite century and go forth a little bit to the 20th century. And
oh my God,
about World War I and what a role Newport News and Hampton Roads had in that conflict. So we thank you all. We actually have our furthest international viewer today he gets the prize, or he or she, Kelly, I'm not sure, from South Africa, and many from across California all the way to Connecticut. So we've spanned the world with John Worden today, and thank you again, John, for a fascinating talk.
Yes, just you all remember, always sink before surrender.
That's right.
Thank you all.
That's right. And thank you, and see you next time.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.